there comes a time when you should go beyond survival mode and you should start living. And we see how David has been doing this in 2 Samuel 8 by becoming a superpower, by having economic dominance over his enemies. David was no longer interested in sitting in the city of David and waiting for his enemies. He wasn't just sitting, defending his borders, but he was going into the land of his enemies, defeating them, making them subject to him, so that they would bring tribute to him. We already see how David took control of Metheg Hama, which is the administrative control of the Philistines. And we saw how he went to Moab and he decimated the population to prevent them from raising an army against him. He also made them pay tribute, which would have been their oil, their grain, their livestock, etc. And so now we have Hadadezer, who is trying to regain control of the Euphrates River, and David attacks him. So why the Euphrates River, you may ask? It is because it was the economic center of the ancient Near East. So controlling it meant controlling the Silk Road, which means you can tax every merchant, every shipment, every caravan that was moving from Mesopotamia into the Mediterranean. And you can also set up toll roads. This gave David access to resources and wealth that, funny enough, the Arameans of Damascus, they came to help Hadadezer. And David struck down 2,000 of them. They just could not mind their business. And because of it now, David had put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus. And the Arameans became subject to David and brought tribute to David. And David took gold from Hadadezer. And he took over the towns of Hadadezer, which had great quantity of bronze. So the Arameans probably would have been spared because David wasn't going after them. David was going after Hadadezer. But for whatever reason, they wanted to join in the fight that wasn't even theirs. So now they become subject to David as well. And so David ended up putting garrisons in the land of the Arameans in Syria. So putting garrisons meant putting military outposts in the land of your enemies. So Israelite soldiers would be living in the heart of Syria. They would be acting as a police force to collect taxes and to prevent any secret military buildup. Again, garrisons were military and administrative occupation. And you would use this tactic for 3 reasons. Number 1, it would be an early warning sign. So if a subject nation so much as sharpened their swords or built any fortifications, then garrison soldiers would immediately be able to know and report it to David. Number 2, it prevented the element of surprise because garrison soldiers would have been as if they were spies. And so they would know beforehand if the subject nation was planning an attack against their master. And number 3, putting garrisons was a way of collecting tax and resources. Tributes were heavy. They were gold, they were silver, they were bronze, they were grain, they were livestock, they were oil. So it was in large quantity. So instead of the kings having to bring it to Jerusalem, the garrison soldiers would be the ones to collect it from those nations and then bring it to Jerusalem. It was also a way to audit tax because the garrison soldiers would ensure that the best was going to Jerusalem and that the subdued nation wasn't skimming off the top. And 3, it was a psychological presence, because garrison soldiers were a visual reminder of the power of the king. And the entire country that King David was in control of now could become a tax haven, and he would be able to set up tolls at different points in that country so that the Israelites can go through. So we see how David wasn't just sitting on his hands as king. He wasn't just sitting duck. He was actually proactive and going into the land of his enemies and setting garrisons and making sure that his enemies are subject to him and that they bring tribute, they bring their wealth to him. Same goes for us. In order to be successful in life, in order to be a superpower, in order to have economic dominance, you have to go beyond living in the survival mode. You cannot thrive in survival mode. You cannot always sit on your hands. You cannot always be sitting duck, waiting for something to happen, waiting for your enemies to come against you, waiting for spiritual warfare in order for you to fight. You need to stand up and you need to get up and you need to go and do the things that God has asked you to do and take possession of the things that God has promised you. Just as David took advantage of his situation and he put in place systems so that he can actually have money. He created toll roads so that he can make more money. His enemies were subject to him, so they brought tribute to him. He now has access to wealth and it was accumulating wealth. However, the one thing I love about David is that it says King David dedicated these articles to the Lord as he had done with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued. So everything that he took from his enemies, he dedicated all that plunder that he took from Hadadezer and all of them, he dedicated them to the Lord. God was so pleased with David that to the king of Hamath, who didn't like Hadadezer, when David defeated Hadadezer, he sent his son Joram to David with articles of silver and bronze and gold, just so that he can stay in David's good graces. And again, all of this made David more famous and more powerful and more rich. He even put garrisons in the towns of Edom, and they became subject to David as well. So David had all of these nations become subject to him and paying him tribute. And then he put garrisons, he put his own soldiers in their lands so that they can be his eyes and ears. And they would ensure that the tribute will actually come to David and that those nations were not stealing or skimming off the top. And David dedicated all of these things to God. In the same way that when you start accumulating wealth, when you start becoming successful, when you start having everything that God has promised you, you need to dedicate these things to God. And we saw that with Hannah. When Hannah was fervently praying, bitterly weeping to God, asking God for a son, what did she do? She dedicated him all the rest of his life to the Lord. And he became a priest in the house of the Lord because her son was not just hers. God gave her Samuel and she gave Samuel right back to God. So you do the same when God bless you. You give everything back to God.